Okay, we're recording. And so now we're going to kick off book 7, and we're going to get into, I guess what could be said is arguably the most famous philosophical metaphor, which is the analogy of the cave. But again, we'll kind of review as to how we got here. So in book 6, Socrates and his interlocutors were talking about the nature of the philosopher king and how it is that you can have people who are actually philodoxers as opposed to philosophers. There was a discussion about how philosophers can somehow become corrupted by the beast, by the crowd. And there was a discussion after that, not only about how the fate of some individuals who have philosophical natures can be corrupted by convention and put toward at least less noble or even outright evil ends, a discussion about what the features are of the philosophical soul is and what the ultimate concern of that person who is truly oriented to a philosophical soul and how it pertains to the ultimate line of inquiry, which is what is the nature of good or the good or goodness. And to that end, Socrates employs 2 useful analogies, which I think essentially lead like stepping stones into the analogy of the cave. The first one being the analogy of the sun as representing what the nature of the good is like. So while the sun itself is not the good, he does make the analogy that the same way the sun provides the light which our eyes use not only to see objects around us, but also provides essentially the life force for our eyes to even be there to perceive it to begin with. The good essentially provides its form of light, which is the truth. And our ability of our quote-unquote eyes, which you could say is our reasoning, our intellectual faculties, the eyes of our mind, for that to see the true forms around us, which are things that live in what Socrates calls the intelligible realm. So the things that we perceive through reason. And here, this leads us into the analogy of the divided line, where Socrates essentially stratifies the proximity of somebody's mental activity to the truth on sort of a spectrum or axis of clarity, with things that are being sort of appearances, random thoughts, opinions about things that you see around you, or responses to stimuli being at the low end, because those are the least clear, the least developed, the least introspective things that you harbor in your mind as you go through your day, to the highest form, which is where you achieve true understanding in the intelligible realm of a concept, of an idea, of an essence, of a form, to use their language, where through introspection and metacognition, thoughts about the thoughts, and a motivation toward achieving a higher level of thorough understanding of a concept, you are able to quote unquote see, again with the mind's eye, this form or essence that you're trying to understand. Whether that's cheesiness or whether that's beauty or whether that's the good, which would be the ultimate concern of a well-informed, well-groomed, and well-educated philosopher. And so that now leads us into book 7, where Socrates is still elaborating on the idea of, okay, well, how should I explain to my interlocutors what the effect of education is on the educated, or the philosopher in this case, and what the effect is on the crowd, what the effect is on the people who are not there with you in terms of the amount of vision you've accumulated through education or through preparation. And so he uses the analogy of the cave to describe this relationship. I'm going to hand it over to you because
You're doing such a good job.
because I've heard you talk at length about the analogy of the cave, and you've actually, I think, employed it in your day-to-day work to help people as you mentor people through the line of work that you do. Um, so I was going to hand it over here just to kind of let you kind of give your exposition on the allegory of the cave.
Sure.
But I'm obviously here to weigh in and kind of
Thanks. That was a nice
walk with you
introduction.
through it.
Yeah, that was a nice introduction. We are trying to find out what it takes to create a philosopher. And so, because someone can have the philosophic nature and they may have the right upbringing, but there is something that needs to happen to take them from just having the nature and the upbringing and prevent them from being swept away by convention and become a priest of the beast as opposed to a philosopher.
Nice. Right? Priest of the beast.
Of the beast. I used that today in some conversation with someone.
Yeah, we'll get a copyright on that.
Philodoxa. So this is Socrates' attempt to convince Adiamatus and Glaucon that it is possible to create such philosophers. And the process starts with understanding how far removed we are from the truth, the beautiful, knowledge, and good. And talking about the current state of affairs, most of us carry within us an imagination of concepts. This is again that line analogy. It's very closely linked to the cave, and that's why I go back to it. You did a good job explaining it. I just want to go over it myself, slow my thoughts down. Imagination is the realm that most of us live in. We can imagine what it is like to do a certain thing or to be a certain way. As a matter of fact, for most of our lives, we can imagine what it is like to be happy. And it is an imagination because we have never done any further introspection or examination to understand even what happiness means. Once you start on that path, you go from I can imagine what happiness is to I believe this is how one can be happy. And that is that step from imagination to belief is the first step that one would take, saying, wait a minute, I imagine this is what happiness is, but I have no idea. I have zero idea. I have absolutely no idea what this is. What is it to be happy? How do I know? You start in a process. And whatever that process is, could be a car, a house, a spouse, or whatever, right? Or it could be some other means of acts, could be religion, it could be whatever, something, your work, your pursuits, many different things. You choose, you think, I believe that if I were to excel as a surgeon, I would be happy. And that's a belief that you cling on to. And you keep going down that path and see how it plays out. Now, if you had access to the truth, if you knew, that means you knew all the whys that led to happiness, you wouldn't choose such a narrow path. You do not. And so you're blind. And you're just a blind guy just walking on this path. And you may stumble upon something, but you would never be confident. Not the same way as someone who knows that this is where I need to go, understands all the whys, and can follow in that direction. This person might be tagging along with you. This blind person may be along with you on the ride, for the ride, but it's not the same. You knowing or you closing your eyes and just walking are two very different things. So you have this belief that this path is going to get you there. And it turns out it doesn't take long before that runs out. And you're like, my gosh, like what I know now is that this is not the path. But what is the path? Let me do some more thinking. And if you're fortunate enough, you could live enough versions of this life where you try many things out. And it's like a library of unending books, and you don't know which book is the right book, and you just keep opening every one. There's a chance that you'll never get to what you got to. And even if you get to something, you may not believe it, because the library also contains books that are leading you astray. You just don't know. Mm-hmm. And you have to try enough things out by chance, by good fortune or whatever. You come upon something that now tells you, hey, this is what it means to be good. This is what it means to be evil. At least this is our understanding of it. This is the understanding of collective wisdom of, 10,000 years. This is what it means. And now you could say, okay, I think this is the path. Philosophy is the way to go. I'm not the only one who's been on this path before. You find yourself in a collective of many millions of humans, just like you, billions apparently, who've tried to do this. And there is collective literary works of this. And you participate in that great conversation. You say, okay, I think I know what these guys are trying to tell me. But even that thought is just a thought. You don't know for sure, right? True understanding happens when you take those principles and you apply it to your life, and you lose and you win, and you lose and you win. You go back and forth with it, and you come to an understanding of what it takes, the sacrifice one has to do, the pain that you have to go through, and what happiness is not a constant feeling of elation. It's a life well lived. This entire process of starting with imagination, belief, making those sacrifices, being ignorant, being blind, to coming to this thought phase where you think you know, and writing yourself a little bit, you come to the understanding that that is a life well lived. But knowledge is still is eons away. It is untouchable. You're never going to get there. But that is the limit of a mortal life. Mm-hmm. So that understanding is what it takes for one to have a chance at becoming a philosopher. Now, this path that I explained to you is, there's no director in this path. Like, there's no one watching you, Eddie, and saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to let Eddie make this mistake and I'm going to watch. And then once he makes that mistake, I'm going to come in and say, hey, Eddie, you made this mistake, right? Did you get it now? Okay, this is the path you need to try next. And then you set you on that path. Mm-hmm. And then he waits for you to make a mistake. You are just doing this on your own.
It'd be great, though.
It'll be great. You think it'll be, you will question that person, right? This is because, what if this person what if this person is a priest of the beast? You never know, right? Who's a guru and who's not? We had this conversation a couple of episodes ago. As a matter of fact, I would push back on that point. You don't want somebody to do that for you. You want to do it yourself, because that is how you have the most confidence. Rather than someone telling you. If I were to just, it's like Socrates. Say, Socrates, what is the good? And he takes a pause right there. He says, I'm not going to tell you what a belief is, because, this belief is a blind thing. It's just following its own path. I don't want to tell you that. As opposed to here, this is what the good is, my friends. And the republic ends right there.
Yeah.
It's the same way. You don't want somebody to tell you that. You want to be walking these steps on your own. But this is a conversation in which Socrates is being asked to say, okay, how do you create a philosopher? And he says, fine, this is how we will build one. And the way he builds one, he says, the way that I would be able to make this person walk these steps from understanding to thought so from imagination to belief to thought to understanding is through education. But what is that education? What's the nature of the education is what chapter 7 is about. We kind of hinted on education before, but this is now someone who's kind of walked, the guardian has walked some steps, is a little bit more mature than that guardian that we discussed a few chapters ago who needed physical development in music. So the cave allegory is used as a way to say, what would happen? It doesn't talk about the education, but it talks about what would happen once this person receives this education. How would they go from the realm of imagination to the realm of understanding through the education? See, that's what the cave allegory is about. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, well, I was being a little ironic when I said that would be great. And then I realized, in a way, I think I would stand by that and say that that's precisely what reading this is. That's why you sort of read this conversation.
Yes.
Because I don't have a direct coach, but I mean, in a way, there's sort of what you would call some sort of transcendent coaching that you get when you read philosophy. So in some ways, yeah, I am sort of looking for somebody to guide the way, somebody who's thought deeply about these things and can offer some guide points.
That's an excellent point. And I was taking you saying that someone directs you quite literally. You don't want
I was being ironic, and then I realized, no, actually, no. I stand by what I said, except for I'm choosing the right. You just have to choose the right people to read or to right people to listen to, but at the same time, understand that you live your life in conversation with the consequences of your decisions, and so that's actually where the deep, actual, thorough learning happens. The toil and trouble that Socrates talks about as part of the education process. Much of it not having anything to do with schooling and more having to do with dealing, again, in conversation with the consequences of your life, things that are within and without your control, how you deal with those things. And that's how wisdom, prudence, as we call it, is accumulated.
And this is, in a way, these words of Plato, in a way, is Plato directing you in that path. It is the most selfless act in a way. Like we can drink from this fountain as much as we want, and it'll keep giving. It asks for nothing in return. All it asks for you is to come back to it.
Yeah.
When you have questions, that is it. And even that it doesn't ask. You have this beautiful bookshelf, and it has all of this philosophy on it. And there is no beckoning from it, right? You go to it. Mm-hmm. It's happy to just be there in the bookcase. And so it's of all the advice or all the sponsorship or whatever that someone else gives you, this is the most selfless one. These giants, right, mm-hmm. who are dead for millennia, are still speaking to us, mm-hmm. and they have nothing to gain.
Yeah, that lost on me. I mean, that's fascinating.
That's awesome.
I mean,
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So with the cave allegory, so what Socrates is doing now is, again, talking about the relationship of education to the philosopher, and not only that, but the relationship to the philosopher to the uninitiated that results from it. So he uses the cave allegory, which probably a lot of listeners have heard about. And what I realized that when I read through the cave allegory myself, I realized that most of the descriptions that I'd heard, even before reading Republic, were woefully inadequate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they would say, well, Plato was talking about the nature of reality, and he said, it's kind of like you're looking at shadows in a cave, and you think that's reality. And then, but somebody lets you out of the cave, and then you see the real world. And now you go back into the cave, and nobody believes you now that you've seen the real world, because you've seen how bright and we really sort of life. And sort of, it was sort of, it was an allegory that sort of warned people against living a life of illusion, which, yes, it could be, but it's much, much deeper than that. What the allegory is, to get into the specifics, is a conceptual analogy that Socrates draws up and says, well, he's trying to explain the spectrum of understanding, the spectrum of clarity of thought that he outlines in the divided line. And all of it in relation to the good, which he continues to use the sun as the source of, as a child of goodness. He uses it as an analogy for what good is like. He's not saying the sun is good, but he's like, the sun is like good, is what he's trying to say. So he basically creates a scenario where he said, imagine a people that are chained up in a cave, and they're essentially staring at a wall in the cave. And that's all they see. That's all they know. Now, these people are facing in one direction. Now, this is key, and it is a key part of the analogy that nobody talks about when you look up or when somebody talks about the analogy of the cave, is that these people are in fixed position. And here you have to sort of lean into the anatomic part of the analogy, which is that you really can only look. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. You can kind of glance side eye at something, but you can really only look where your body is turned toward. Okay, it's hard for you to look at something that's right behind you. So in this cave analogy, it's key in the analogy that Socrates says that these people are chained and they're facing a wall in the cave, and that's all they're looking at. That's all they can see. Now, behind them, there is a flame burning. And between the flame and the backs of the people staring at the wall, there are people walking back and forth, walking and just doing random things. Sometimes they're carrying statues of other people. Sometimes they're carrying representations, fixtures of animals. They're carrying different objects. And all the people that are chained and facing the wall see are those reflections, the shadows. And that's all they know. That is what their reality is shadow. And so when the people walking behind them, between them and the flame in their back, are making noises and it echoes off the wall that they're staring blankly at, they attribute those sounds to the shadow, the movements to the shadow. And so they begin essentially to form essentially a thought language, an entire process of thinking that is completely anchored in a shadow world, a realm of shadows, of illusions. And that is their reality. They react to it. They use as currency of their thought the images that they see in front of them. And these are just mere shadows of what is actual reality. And they have no idea. That is the crowd. I mean, that is the conventional thinking. The conventional thinker is that person chained and staring at the wall and at shadows and reacting to shadows and making decisions based off of the shadows that they see, essentially living a life informed by illusion, shadow. And so then Socrates says, now imagine one of them is set free, is compelled to be released from the chains, and for some reason is actually turned about so that they actually see the flame that is the source of the shadow that they've been seeing on the walls. The initial reaction to that person who's never seen the flame was that this is too bright. They can't handle the light of the fire that they're looking at. And this is not even the real light. They're just now starting to see the beginnings of this idea, well, there's this thing that is light. And that this whole time that they've been looking at shadows that are really silhouetted absences of that light, which they thought were the actual substance of their existence, the substance of their being, of their life experience. And then he says, now imagine that person, not only after seeing the flame, recognizes that, is now brought up, climbs up out of the cave into the sunlit world. And imagine how hard it would be for them to perceive what they're seeing around them, because their eyes are so used to darkness. Their eyes are so used to looking for shadow that now, in a weird way, they're overwhelmed. They're blinded, but they're not actually blind. They're blinded by the overwhelm of information that they're getting, because now they're seeing things lit by the sun. And what'll happen is he follows his footsteps. The first thing they would see is their own shadow, because they're used to seeing their own shadow. And then gradually they will kind of look up and maybe see reflections in the bodies of water around them. And as they slowly draw their eyes upward toward the sky, they'll start to see objects on the ground around them and realize that this is the true substantive three-dimensional components of the reality that they've been interpreting all this time. And then finally, at the last bit, they may hazard to look up toward the sky and see the actual sun blazing down on them. And that is when they have a perception of good. Okay, so this is his analogy to describe the process of moving from the lower edges of the divided line, where you're having just reactionary thinking to stimuli, and moving into the realm of the intelligible, of the conceptual, of the essences, of the forms, of the true nature of things. And the irony in this analogy, which is beautiful, is that the eyes essentially represent your reasoning faculty. So what most of us see on a day-to-day basis is what Socrates would consider illusion, because we just have like these simple stimuli that we form opinions about. But what we see with our mind, what we see through reasoning, very few of us actually do that, because most of our activity revolves around responding to stimuli. And so actually the preponderance of our experience is in the illusion phase of life, and not in what Socrates would call the actual truth seeking, or the actual truth part of life, which is the intelligible, the essences, the forms. So in a weird way, I talked about this before, we are actually already living in a dream state, and it actually requires you thinking and using your reasoning faculties to actually see things for what they actually are. Now, the analogy continues. So this person who's now seen the light of day literally is brought back down into the cave, and guess what happens? They start talking about everything that they saw up there and trying to explain the things that they saw up there, and that does not make sense. The people that live in the cave are like, what the hell are you talking about? You're nuts. Something happened to you. Something's wrong with you. This, and the realization is that you have now, you've lost them. And we've talked about this before when we talk about, the beast, right? The beast won't listen to you unless you learn how to manipulate them. They won't, because everything you say won't register. You're speaking a different language. And so the other point that Socrates makes in this analogy is that you also run the risk of, once you've seen the light, once you've seen the true form of things. Oh, and I should have mentioned that when you're up on the surface in the sunlit world, the analogy there is that is the realm of the intelligible. When you're seeing the actual objects, that's you understanding the essences of things like truth and happiness and beauty and justice, those sorts of things. And then when you come back down to the cave and try to explain those things to people, they have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And you'll be treated that way. You'll either be rejected or you'll be recriminated for doing so. And that's precisely what happens to Socrates himself. I mean, we talked about the apology, right? And he ends up being, put to death in no small part because of his efforts to sort of try to get people to see what he saw, or at the very least to understand why they don't see. And so the analogy also talks a little bit about the fact that once you've seen the light, you really won't care about the shadow realm anymore. Once you've seen the substance, the sunlit substance that's out there, and you have a firm grasp on understanding, Socrates does point out that the philosopher will be tempted to sort of live in that realm of light, that they will lose interest in the realm of the illusory and the shadow. And so they will somehow end up self-isolating from this mob that doesn't understand them. And a lot of the things that the mob does, which is bequeath honors to reward conventional behavior and things like that, the philosopher would lose all interest in that. They just won't care. They've seen the other side of things. They've sort of seen through things and realize that those things are just as illusory as everything else. And so that's why he says it's very difficult for the philosopher king to actually come to pass, to come into fruition, because you would have to find a way to get the philosopher king to actually participate at the level of the people who can only see in shadow form, without ostracizing the philosopher. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And he actually makes an appeal in the midst of this analogy that the philosophers should find a way to commit themselves to helping their fellow cave dwellers. And then Adeimantus points out, was like, well, wait a minute, but why should they do that?
Before we go, I think because now it's about, that's important to discuss, but let's just stick with the cave for now, because you've done such a good job kind of explaining the visual itself is just so.
This analogy is great because has so many layers to it.
So many layers to it, right? And you're right. The cave allegory you hear about it a lot, and to the point that you made about folks not being accurate in the description, I don't necessarily take much, you know, I don't care so much about whether they missed a detail here and there. When I read the cave allegory the first time I read it in isolation. I just turned to a page and I read the cave allegory because someone had mentioned it and I read it. And one has no idea of what is being discussed here. You get some idea, but it's just a very superficial idea of what is trying to be conveyed. The cave allegory rests on this prelude. So much preamble goes into it until you get to the cave. Why are we discussing the cave? And quite frankly, I'm surprised that I'm saying this, and that this is probably I don't know how many times I've read the cave allegory now, but I've not read the Republic that many times. This is my most detailed run through of the Republic. The read through prior to this one was not as detailed that we're doing for the podcast. And the cave allegory is not that big a deal compared to the richness of the Republic. It kind of, now when I read it, and I've read it,
I can't believe you're saying this either.
I know. I'm kind of underwhelmed by the cave allegory. I am. I don't know why that's the case. I'm just underwhelmed by it because the point has been made. I don't know why it was introduced, and I think it is a disservice to the Republic to put the cave allegory in the middle of it, because then people go to the cave allegory and everybody talks about, like you said, oh, this is reality and that's not reality, and true forms and this and that. It is a beautiful allegory. Don't get me wrong, much better than the sun and stuff. And there are some allegories that come down the line that are also very powerful. But I'm just underwhelmed by it. I don't know why. I just wanted to say it for the record. Now I'm underwhelmed by it. But there are some beautiful lines in here, and I think those lines need to be just discussed. One of them is, what the prisoners would take for true reality is nothing other than the shadows of those artifacts. That's the point that you brought up, right? That is the realm of imagination, right? It's just you nowhere close to what the truth of those artifacts are. These people are taking these artifacts and they're walking in a line, in between the light and the wall and the shadows falling on the wall, and they're making noises. And as a human, your mind is so active, you're just trying to make sense of this. Your head is, and your neck and everything is just it is fixed with tethers to this wall. You can't look anywhere else. And even the people next to you, you can't actually see them. You only hear their voices, and you only hear what they're saying about this thing on the wall. And there is this sense that there are some who have looked at the patterns and they can predict which artifact comes after which, and which one makes which sound is associated with what. And the person who's the best at coming up with which artifact connected to what sound and which artifact follows what is now considered to be the most honorable amongst all of these people, right? And that's the world that this person lives in. This is us in this imaginative world. This is our conventional world, where we are looking at this wall and things are being flashed on top of this wall. And we like to believe that a certain vehicle of transportation would actually take you to a place where you'd be in a better state mentally, would help you connect with your family. And if you look at a car ad, I keep saying this, right? You look at car ads are not about, it has 4 wheels and it has a steering wheel and the door's open. It's about, they show this family of very, very good looking, happy people driving around and going to some resorts and spending time with their grandparents or surprising their spouse with this car. The car has nothing to do with any of that. You see what I mean? But when you're looking at the image of it, you are associating that if I were to buy this thing, I get that. That's an association that you make. And And that's an imagination, you see. And you can create these lines with something even more sinister, like, healthcare and outcomes, right? The fact that what we do in hospitals actually improves the lives of people is imagination. It's projected on the wall. And we have people inside of healthcare who will say we need to do this and we need to do that. They are the ones who are, they've looked at which artifact follows which artifact, what sound it makes. Like, they have gotten it so good that we think that they are honorable for it. And we now feel that this person should be applauded and honored for what they're saying. Everybody's looking at the wall, right? That is, so what the prisoners take for true reality is nothing other than the shadows of these artifacts, right? And this process of taking away the shackles and being dragged toward the light, it is not that it's a decree. It's actually a physical process where someone is choosing to make a guardian out of this particular person who's fixed at the wall. But this person has no idea what a guardian even is, has no idea what it means. They believe this is reality. They have nothing to do with anything else. They're not thinking on those lines. They believe this is what gets them to, they imagine this is what gets them to happiness. And now you have somebody who just undoes these shackles and then just dragging them in one direction. And they're like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to, this is reality. Like, I want to be the person who can guess the next artifact that's coming. And not only that, when they are made to turn and look at this light that is casting the shadows, it hurts their eyes. And they're uncomfortable. And they don't know where they're going. They're in a crisis in a way. And it's not that they're doing it by choice at that point. They're still being dragged. And the process of dragging them completely rips the fabric of reality. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is what I'm seeing on the wall is just shadows. Like, there are all of this mechanism behind me just to make me believe that this is reality. And this is no way even close to what reality is. And as they're being dragged up that cave, it is a tough, arduous journey up that cave. They don't want to make it. They just want to go back to the comfort of fetter me back. I want to just stare at that wall. It's just so much easier to do that. What good is this going to get me? I was there. I could guess the next artifact. Now you're dragging me up this thing. And you get dragged up this thing. And as you're entering the mouth of the cave, and if someone dragged him away by force from there along the steep, rough upward path and did not let him go until he had dragged him into the light of the sun, wouldn't he be pained and angry at being treated that way? You and me have had similar experiences. Yeah. Right? Where you're mad when you read this, like, or when you experience it, or you tell somebody about it, and the response that you get, it takes a while to realize that this is a tall order. What they're talking about is, we are very focused on the individual who's turning and is being dragged. But if you were to focus on who's the one who's dragging, that is a tall order. You're taking an individual who didn't want to move, no idea, no concept of what the truth or good is. Because nowhere is it written in this entire allegory that if you were to drag them from this place where they're staring into imagining what things are, to you make them see the light, nowhere is it that they're going to be happy doing it. It is all pain and hurt and dragged and all of that till you get there, right? There's no guarantee that you're going to be happy doing this process. So you're taking somebody and you're dragging them. The person who's dragging understands that fact, that this person is going to be mad at them. They're going to be angry at them to do this. And maybe at the end of it, whatever outcome you're trying to desire from this person, you may not get from this person. Once this person sees what is truth and what is good and what is beauty, you might actually not get the outcome that you want from this. So the role of the person doing the dragging is something that nobody talks about in the cave allegory. And that is what this whole cave allegory is about. The education is the intervention. and the intervention is being done by somebody. The question is, who does the intervention for us? And that's why I think that this allegory is not about an ideal republic or a mentor dragging you through this. This is all happening inside of your mind. You are the person who's dragging. You are the one being dragged.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a part of you that is always, always in contact with the unity, with the good. It's such a small infinitesimal part that for the most part, you have no inkling that you even have it. One day, for some unforeseeable reason, you're in a crisis, you're being dragged along this path of pain and suffering by this little self toward the good. And it's a tough journey.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're pointing out why I disagree. I think you're pointing out why this is such a compelling and probably the richest analogy that I can imagine, because the interpretations that you can draw from this are exist on multiple levels. But to go back to this idea of turning, I agree with you completely. I think the implication in this analogy is that whether the turning of the individual away from that wall toward the light is something that, could be foisted upon you within the realm of the analogy by somebody else dragging you up that hill. But as you point out, more often than not, it's circumstance. It's a moment of reckoning that does that. And which is why when we talk about the divided line, when you talk about the first two segments of the line, when you're simply, in the reactionary phase, something has to draw you into out of the realm of simple stimulus response thinking and into thinking about thinking and into thinking about wanting to truly understand something, crossing over into that second line segment that Socrates says has a higher amount of clarity and a lower amount of shadow and illusion. Something has to motivate you, which is why I was saying in that third phase, there has to be a motivational component. And in my opinion, it's usually a moment of reckoning. Mm-hmm. It's people who have stared at the shadows and without really moving, realize that this is not it. That something happens to tell them that what they're seeing in front of them is not compelling. This does not resonate with them.
Or maybe when they're staring at the things in front of them, and they get good at guessing which artifact's coming next and what sound is associated with it, they find themselves hollow on the inside. Why is this not making me any happier?
Right.
That is when you come upon a crisis.
Right. There's a crisis. And it's the crisis that's dragging you up that.
Right. But even in that situation, it's still a positive energy consuming process.
Yes.
Where it is not that there's a crisis and then boom, you're on your path.
No.
I think there's a crisis and there is a part of you that drags the rest of you through this very difficult journey.
Yeah.
And several times along the way, you're going to be like, man, this is so painful. Why the heck am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go back and fetter me back in. Mm-hmm. It is like the Matrix.
Yeah.
Where that guy says...
He wants to go back.
Yeah.
He'd rather live in the realm of
He
illusion,
chews on that steak and he's like, oh my gosh, I know this is fake, but I love it. Put me back.
Yeah. But Socrates says the last thing to be seen is the form of the good, when you're on the sunlit world, and it is only seen with toil and trouble.
It's only seen with toil and trouble. That's the point.
Right.
And you see it's still considered, if you read this, it's all about the person being who's turning around. What about the person who's dragging, who's doing this work, right? And that is what is being discussed before. They say, how do you create a philosopher? Well, this is what we do. Let me tell you what is required. And so is there anything else you wanted to say?
I think I didn't get so much of a prescriptive sense in the analogy about Socrates saying, well, the individuals must be dragged into the sunlight. I think it was more of he was just trying to explain the relationship of the role of education, and the would-be philosopher who would undergo this education, and the relationship of those two to not only their understandings of the world around them, but their relationship to the individuals who still see the world in the old way. And so I think what he was doing was just giving a very nice analogy as to what those relationships look like when somebody goes from being conventional to disillusioned to indoctrinated and then right back into.
No, I think I'm not saying that. See that. So I think if you look at it this way, there are several individuals.
But I hadn't thought of what you said, so
Yeah.
you're bringing up a good point, and I'm still thinking about it. But you're right. There is the part of, well, yeah, he brought this up because he's actually finishing up stuff he's talked about in book 3, which is like, well, here's how you. This is what the philosopher king needs to be educated about.
Right.
And then there was this big, diversion into like war and families and all this other stuff. And so now he's getting back to finishing up what the education should revolve
Correct.
around.
And the thing about the hero's journey is people forget that in a hero's journey there is a facilitator, and the facilitator doesn't really get a lot of mention. But like in the Karate Kid, you have right the master, so
Mr. Miyagi,
yeah. Right, and so there's always a facilitator, and this is talking about the facilitator. Like in this story, the hero is the one being dragged. The facilitator is doing the dragging.
Yeah. Or actually, it's the educator that does the turning around. If I'm not mistaken, that's what Socrates says. That's the craft. The craft
how do you get them to turn around?
The craft is getting them to turn around.
I think the if I were to put a little bit of a pause there, the breaking of the bonds is the facilitator. The turning around is the hero. To your point, the bonds are broken. You could still choose to keep looking at the wall. Why would you turn around to look at what's behind you?
There has to be some motivation.
There has to be some motivation.
Right.
And what would make you look is what is the point of the cave allegory.
Right.
It is not the physical dragging you through the stuff. It is once someone is going to break your bonds, someone is going to drag you through all the pain and the suffering. They're going to drag you. But what is going to make you turn around in the first place? Because there is a part of you that would say, no, I'm happy to look at that wall.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the bonds have gone, but this is what I want to keep doing.
Right.
And there it happens. I've seen this, even in myself, I've seen it, where I'm just comfortable in the status quo. I want to watch Netflix and sit on the couch. Why should I?
You're going to literally stare at the shadows.
Literally stare at the shadows on Netflix. Right? That's right. What an allegory, Netflix allegory.
Yeah.
But, and so you can see that. So what makes you turn around is what comes up in the later part. But what is this? What makes you turn around? But the things that you mentioned, you hit all the high points. It is painful to look at the light. When you turn around, you look at the light, and you could just immediately turn back around and look at the wall. But you don't. You still are inquisitive, figuring out, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And that makes you go down this path.
Yeah.
And then it gets harder and harder, and someone needs to kind of drag you through it. That's where the facilitator comes in. But you step out of the cave, and first thing you do is, it's so bright. It's just so bright that you cannot even stare up first. You look into water, you look in shadows and places where you're seeing the sun kind of hit a surface and reflect back on you. And you're like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. So you go from the realm of imagination to belief to thought.
Right.
You think what's going on. And then eventually you can then start looking up at the night sky, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's out here? This is this infinite, things that I've never seen before. And, this is what actually a man and woman look like. And this is what things look like. And then eventually, once your eyes are accustomed, then you start looking at the sun, but you look at it. You never touch it or hold on to it or encompass it. You just look at it. And so you have an understanding of what the good is, but you can never know it. Now you're in this world, and all you're trying to do is trying to get to know it. And you can spend eternity out there in the real world figuring out.
Right. You're in this realm of lofty ideals that are being lit up by objects and concepts that are even more astronomically lofty than that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're looking now. You're in the world of the forms. You're not talking about hypothesis. You're not saying that this is what a model of a horse looks like. This is a horse,
right.
And you've seen not only this is a horse. You've seen the horse that makes all of the horses, the cheese that makes all of the cheese. So you're in that world now, and you are in there for eternity. You can be in there, and that now you understand to be the truth. You understand the knowledge of that is what knowledge is, and then what all this encompasses is encompassed by is the good. And now suddenly you are asked to go back into this world, and that's where
Adamantus.
Yeah. And so before we go to going back down that cave and going into that, why would one do that, and how would you make one do that? The process of going back to the cave is also very beautifully kind of illustrated in the cave allegory. He says that, yeah. So where is it? And so once he sees the sun, he hasn't even gone back down again. You have seen the sun now, right? Finally, what would you conclude about what you thought passed for wisdom when you were back in the cave, right? If there were honors and praises and prizes among the one who was sharpest at identifying the shadows as they passed by, and was best able to remember which usually came earlier, which later, which simultaneously, and who was the best able to prophesize the future, do you think that our man would desire these rewards or envy those amongst the prisoners who were honored and held power? When you're standing outside looking at the sun, you're like, my gosh, I can't believe I fell for that. Right?
Right. It renders the shadow... It renders the knowledge of the shadow realm completely trivial.
Completely trivial.
Right. It's like, no offense to like sports fans, but like it's like baseball stats. I'm like, don't care. It's just not. It's like I can't think of something less important to me.
That's right.
Right.
In the face of the good, what is a title? Yeah. What is a bank balance? Right. Like, what are these things? Yeah. In the face of the good, you've seen the good, and now you're looking at, metrics, the bundle payment metrics on, for insurance coverage. Like, oh my gosh, like this guy figured it out. He's the, chief quality officer and has kind of figured out how to reduce, reporting of staff in colonization rates or whatever. Now so he should write articles and he should be interviewed everywhere. Yeah. And you've seen the good, and you're not going to go back and say, I want to be that guy. You know what I mean? And so he says here, that, do you think that our man would desire these rewards or envy those who, among the prisoners who were honored and held power? Or do you think he would feel with Homer that he would much prefer to work the earth as a serf for another man, a man without possessions of his own, and go through any suffering rather than share their belief and live as they do? You see? Because this statement is not a light statement to make, because there are those who would go out and look at the sun and say, so what? I'd rather go down there and get all the patting of the back and the accolades. I think that is better than just staring at the sun and contemplating on goodness. I'm a man of action, and they would go back in there and would not choose to do this, as opposed to, so that's why a philosopher, if you just take anybody, right, whose bonds do you break? The facilitator has to break the bonds that bind this person to face the wall. You have to choose who this person is. You see? Or the choice has to be made, because then that person has to do the arduous task of actually turning around, which is pure chance. Unless you have the makings of a philosopher. The ones who have the makings of the philosopher are more likely to turn and look at the light and the people carrying the objects behind them. Then that person gets carried up all the way. Then they get shown the sun. And those people are likely to say that I rather be the serf of a man without possessions, rather than share the beliefs of these prisoners, because they are the ones who have the makings of a philosopher and have the upbringings that makes them a philosopher. Not everybody can do this. Mm-hmm. And that's why, it's not that this is not for everybody. The road to enlightenment is not for everybody. And, Plato gets discredited as being an elitist. So who is it for? And he's going to talk about education here in a second.
Yeah.
So it goes to show that, so then you have to be somebody who is, privileged in order to have access to wisdom. I don't think it's necessarily education per se. It's not the education like how you and me talk about it. It's not going to Harvard or Yale. I mean, that's not the point here. It is having a certain bent of mind. It's possible.
Yeah, this is something you and I have deliberated about. I think this might be the thing we've talked most about, you and I, in our friendship, of what brings you here, how important is the fuel, the fire, the angst, the suffering, the motivational force that brings you to this precipice of deciding whether you're going to sort of explore the conceptual realm that leaves the jurisdiction of convention way behind. And now you're essentially in this realm of uncomfortable truths. And I think this is something else you and I have talked about, and you have voiced it very nicely, and it's something that I've felt myself. But there's almost sort of this post-philosophical depression. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've read something, whatever. I've felt moved. I have felt that I've achieved a deeper level of understanding, and it's miserable. Yeah. There's almost, but it does wear off. And
but I want you to expand on that. You're bringing up a very good point.
Well, it's because when you're having a frame shift, when you're basic. That's why I love this analogy. Because when you're turning away from a life of illusion, when you realize that what you had in your mind was an illusion, that in a way is painful. And I think it's because you derive some component of yourself, sense of self, from the illusions you gather around you.
Yes.
And when those get torn away, you are dying.
Yes.
Some part of you is lost.
Yes.
And that process is painful, especially when the illusion gets shredded away from you. I've read things that have been nope. I mean, I read Seneca, and he basically was no. No, you really are not. Think about it, you're not going to live forever. Seriously, though. But I mean, contemplate that deeply. You're not. This second that just passed, it's gone. Now, understand that. And also understand, all that stuff that you really wanted, how much of it do you have now?
Right.
And now how do you feel?
Right.
Seneca did that to me.
Right. Yeah.
And so when that happens, when the illusion gets shredded away from you, there's almost sort of you do sort of lose a limb.
Yeah.
You're in this realm you have kind of a phantom limb syndrome for a little while after you read something that tore illusion away. But there's a maturity that comes out at the other side of that, I think. You sort of, I think, learn to understand that part of the living process, what you talked about, living in conversation with the consequences of your own decisions and the consequences of things that happen outside your control. You develop this sort of sense of maturity that allows you to reframe not only things that happen to you, but just your own journey to begin with. And look back and say, yeah, these were my days in the cave, but I'm now climbing out, or I'm trying to climb out. And I think that's the whole process.
Yeah. And the process is painful.
Yeah.
Like you said, right? When
I've never read anything philosophical and been like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
I've never. And if I did, I'm reading the wrong book.
Right.
I know I'm reading the right book when I get this feeling that's like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
This is making sense and I'm not on the right path.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. And that's the key part there is not just reading it and saying that I agree with this, is reading this and saying that I disagree with everything now that I've come to understand is an illusion. That is the tough part.
Yeah.
Because that is who you are, right? The world has created someone who's looked at these shadows and can predict these shadows and all of that. And now you have to say that I'm not the shadow man anymore. Like, I dropped my book, but I'm not the shadow man anymore, right? So the coming back to the which page?
469. You're almost there.
Almost there.
Aneesh just slammed his book on the ground for emphasis.
Take this book away from me. It's too painful.
I can't take this.
I can't take this anymore. Okay, so he talks about where is that line? And this, which I found was just you said 469.
Oh wait, no. You're trying to find.
Yeah, the cave allegory. Yeah, just one page behind that. Okay, so now, so then what happens to this person? Say this person were to go back down. Okay, we're not going to talk about how to make them go back down. They say they go back down, right? When they go back down, and it now has to go from the light of the sun to the cave, which is obscure, dark, right? He has to first get used to it. So while he goes back and sits among his comrades,
sits in his old seat,
right? And he's looking at the wall now. He's first adjust to the light. He cannot even make out the shadows. And his comrades, they're like, "Oh, this guy's back." And look, like he can't tell one shadow from the next shadow. He's gotten worse. Like whatever happened to him made him worse off than what he is now, right? And he's talking about all the silly things about what he saw and stuff like that, and he's not getting ahead in this world. So if he now had to compete once again with the perpetual prisoners in recognizing the shadow, perpetual prisoners, man, and that's who we are. Like it's just, while his sight was still dim and before his eyes had recovered, and if the time required for readjustment was not short, that means taking a while for him to readjust, which it would, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he provoke ridicule?
Right.
And this is key, because this is not just about the philosopher. It is about the philosopher king who is going to wipe the slate clean and create a population of people who may not have the philosophical bent, but are willing to follow him as the leader, right? Those people should not ridicule. If you're being ridiculed, you're not going to be chosen as a leader, right? And he talks about before you ridicule somebody for what they're saying, you have to realize that they could fall into two groups. One group could be the one that is, look, you understand what it is to know the good. You understand it, and you're seeing somebody who's looking at a shadow on the wall, right? And he's trying to convince you that that is the truth. You could, in your mind, ridicule that person, right? That is the person who's looking at the shadows and saying that's the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Or you may be, if you're not careful, you could be ridiculing somebody who's actually seen the truth, the sun,
right,
and it's come down to this place, and their eyesight is dim, and they're not being able to figure out the shadows on the wall. So before you write somebody off, you've got to figure out which group they fall in.
Right.
Right?
It's such a great part of the analogy, because it's like it goes both ways, right? So when you see somebody who's struggling because they're seeing shadows, what he's saying is that this is either somebody who's seen the light and they're readjusting to the dark, in which case you should be happy for them because they have seen some of what you've seen and they're struggling through the same thing that you've struggled through, or the opposite, which is where you have somebody who, I guess, what would the opposite of that be? That would be they have not seen the light, but they're starting to, and can't, and so then you should pity that person. So either way, there's no situation where you should ridicule anybody who's struggling to see what you've seen, because they're on their way to seeing it, in which case you should be good, or they have an inability to do so, in which case that they're worthy of pity at that point.
And I agree.
It's the confusion of the eyes. So this is in section 518.8. This I flagged. It was such a great part of the analogy. So
that's the maybe confused in two ways, right? anyone with any sense at any rate would remember that the eyes may be confused in two ways and from two causes: when they change from light to darkness, or when they change from darkness to light. I had this example. I was like a master physician in a way, right? This guy practiced for many, many years, practiced in this rural part of the US, where he was a doctor from many miles, right? And he had a way, like a kind of you develop a sense of, who you're seeing. This is a very narrow example of what I'm trying to say. But he had a patient once who came to him. This patient was someone who was a smoker for many years and was losing weight. He was in his 70s. The patient was in his 70s, was losing weight, was coughing, and in the last 6 months or so had suddenly taken a big turn for the worse. And this master physician, he kind of held his hand and said that, it's very likely what you have is cancer. You're a smoker for the longest time. You probably have lung cancer. You're losing a lot of weight and you're coughing like this. And I think that's what's probably what's going to happen here. Now, I can subject you to this entire workup. I can go ahead and this guy couldn't eat, he was kind of malaise, this kind of, it's kind of, you could see it, like he was cachectic. So he was like, I can send you to a big city close by. We can get all this workup done, including a CT scan. And then you go meet with an oncologist and stuff like that. That's going to be many thousands of dollars, and it's going to be many trips back and forth. You have an old wife, and that's it. Is this something that you want to undergo, or do you want to work this up? Just trust me. Based on my experience, I think this is what's happening. This is hard. This is what's happening. This master physician got in trouble because someone witnessed that conversation. It was an MA or somebody who witnessed the conversation and said that, without doing the due diligence of working up, he actually gave this person this diagnosis. Now, and people were talking about it, like, this person's ridiculous. Like, how could he do that? How could you tell somebody you have cancer without putting them through all the testing, right? So the question is this somebody who is, is this a problem of coming from light to darkness or from darkness to light?
Right.
That's a great question. I don't have a follow-up.
Right. It's a question is having seen the light and ending up in darkness, or in the darkness on the way to seeing the light. Right. So it's,
this physician practicing in the rural part of the U.S., has seen this and has to practice within the confines of a modern healthcare system. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, yeah.
And so I thought it's a very narrow sliver of what we're trying to talk about here, but you can see how that could happen.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
So again, so this just talks about the problems that one could have if one is part of the conventional world. You are feeding the beast, and because the bonds will let go, and one has the inherent ability, one looks away, and then one is then dragged through this painful process of actually witnessing what could be what is the good. You have an understanding of it, and now you make your trip back into the world that you have to live in, the world of your comrades, and what could happen to you. One could be ridiculed for it, one could be pitied for it, one could be said that this arduous journey, which this journey is not a fun journey. The happiness, it's not that. I don't think at any point is it mentioned. It's said that these people who are looking at the good or trying to understand the good are inherently happy. Like they're still trying to figure out life in this world outside. So when you come back down and someone to ask you what was your experience like, you're like, well, man, I have an understanding what the good is, but are you happy for it? They won't be able to answer that question, right? And so then what's the point of making this journey, the comrade would say, because look at you, you've come back and you cannot participate in this world. You cannot compete in this world anymore, right? So that brings to the question why would you subject somebody to that? Because one would know inherently, once one has seen the good, or one has understood what it means to know the good, they'll be like, I don't want to go back into that cave again.
Right.
Because this is what's going to happen to me down there. And who cares about that? I don't want to sit and compete in that world anymore. I pity those people.
Yeah. And this is the point where Adeimantus presumptuously assumes the role of the philosopher and says, well, why would the philosopher want to go back down there? Like,
But not go back, because remember, there's a facilitator who pulled this person through.
right. So why would they,
Why would they push him back?
Right. Would the question be like, why force them to go back down? Right. And so, so then at this point, and maybe this might be a good place to pause and we'll pick things up later.
Yep.
But here Socrates reminds him, but don't forget what we talked about earlier. I believe it was in book 5, which is like, it's not about the happiness of one class. It's about the happiness of the entire republic.
Right.
And so again, Socrates now is quite masterfully, I think, resituating the philosopher king back as somebody who's ultimately concerned with the well-being of the soul of all 3 subdivisions, and not just themselves.
The key line here is the part that you brought about, and that's why I feel like the role of the facilitator is very important, the cave allegory.
Yeah.
If one has to understand it in the context of the republic. Because if Socrates says this, that which I believe is true, like if one were to go through this process by themselves, without anybody intervening at any point, if one were to break their bonds, turn around, walk these steps, and get out on their own, right? One didn't consult a book of philosophy, one didn't do anything. It all came from within. And you step outside and you stare at the sun, you don't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
Right? You don't owe Socrates, you don't owe Plato, you don't owe any, because you came to that understanding all by yourself. And there are some people who claim that, as a matter of fact. They came to that understanding by themselves, right? It's almost called like a divine grace. Like they just came to the all-knowing state all by themselves.
Yeah.
They don't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
But for every one of us who has been dragged through this process, someone broke the bonds. Yes, we did the turning, and then we were dragged through it. We owe it to come back.
Yeah. In a quite literal sense, we've all gone through this. We've all come out of a cave into the light. And here, and again, this is not just so I'm an OBGYN by training, but I'm subspecialized. But there's like a clear obstetric parallels in this analogy of coming out of the cave. And it's true, right? Because Socrates, his mom was a midwife and he would help her. So, and I think he uses obstetric analogies in other writings. But yeah, this is very much like a birth, right? You're coming out into the light. The baby's screaming and crying. The baby went from like this perfect, homeostatic, I'm comfortable here situation in the uterus. And then delivery, the cord gets cut, and all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah. But see, you owe it to your mom in that situation, right?
Yeah.
But in this cave that he's talking about is not a cave necessarily of maternal cave, right?
So back when I was doing deliveries, I was literally a facilitator.
You were the facilitator. You're dragging them out. I see what you mean. But see, that I think that's the key part about why it is not unjust to have these philosophers turn back and go back into the cave, knowing that they're going to face ridicule. They're going to go back into a world which they have come to understand is a world of illusion. And so that is not, and you're not committing an injustice on them because guess what? You dragged them through that. Like you did that. Now they owe you and they have to go back and participate. And I think there is another allegory here of the cave, which is a little bit more, which I feel I've come to appreciate more and more about the Republic, that the cave is the cave of the mind. And everything that you are seeing on that wall is what it is like to see the world through our individual eyes. Like Aneesh sees these objects on this wall. What is creating these objects on the wall is Aneesh's mind. And Aneesh's mind is actually not a thing that you could pinpoint and say this part of the brain is his mind. It was created by the beast, by convention, by society, by interactions with other such minds, my parents' minds and my friends, my relatives, and all well-meaning people. But they created this world of illusions for me. And there are ways by which one can look at the mind from outside in, saying that this is a world of illusions. All of this is created for me, by me. But this is not reality. The reality is kind of outside. This is just a very small sliver.
Right. The reality you perceive requires you to use your reasoning faculty. So the less you use your reasoning faculty, which I would argue most people don't in their day-to-day use their, and I'm talking about using your reasoning faculty to see, not just your eyes, but using your reasoning faculty to see.
And perceive is a way to say it,
and
right?
Perceive. Right.
And the thing here is that everything that you see from the standpoint of the eye, of the mind. And so even though when I say that you could look at this process from afar, you're still in the cave. There are very few, and that's why I think that this is like aspirational, where you can completely exit the cave. You have left the realms of the mind, and you are floating in the general consciousness, and you're seeing what the unity is and what the good is in that context. And then you have to descend back into the mind. I think the best, at least the best that I've been able to do, and I'm sure that those planes are achievable, and probably some folks have achieved it, like probably the Buddha achieved it, but the best that we can do is turn away from the wall and look through the source of light and the moving objects and the people to the mouth of the cave,
right,
and the light on the outside. So you are still inside of your mind, but you have a different perspective of it.
You have you orient yourself to the intelligible world, right?
That in and of itself is thinking about
that burns calories.
Yes,
that's a positive.
It's a positive.
That's
thing.
Not your baseline.
Correct,
right.
But it's also not just the visible world,
right?
Because you're changing the way you are thinking about thinking. You've come to understand that you're getting a glimpse of general consciousness through your mind as you're looking out
right.
At it. So I think that's another part of this allegory. So it's a good place to stop.
All right, I agree. All right,
let's do it.